to another episode of the Brand Shorthand Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Vandergrift, and with me today is a very special guest, Tony Bell. Tony, you have one of the longest titles in our agency, so I'll try to get it right. Executive Director of Client Services and Media. Did I nail it?
Yep, you did.
All right.
Great job, Mark.
Thank you. Well, Tony's joining us again. You may remember him from a past episode. And we're going to discuss the topic of go-to-market strategies. Tony, why don't you give us a little introduction to yourself and to this topic?
Sure. Thanks for having me back, Mark. In my role in its majority, I work very closely with our client services team and all of our other disciplines within our full service offering to help develop and really kind of stay on strategy. It's important to collaborate with the whole team as, looking forward to develop a comprehensive go-to-market strategy for our clients. Really, it provides a roadmap aligning sales, marketing, and the product teams to give them more of a competitive advantage in the market. So that's my job, working very closely with those teams to get that done.
So that all sounds like fancy schmancy marketing talk, but the phrase go-to-market is being used a lot lately. And why do you think it's being used a lot lately, and yet we see so many people getting it wrong?
Well, I think it's trendy because everyone is looking for that silver bullet to win market share quickly. They want results right now. But where people get tripped up is by treating it like a simple flow chart or a checklist of ads to run. They focus so much on the go part of it, and they forget about the strategy. A real go-to-market plan isn't just about selling; it's about having a coordinated plan to win specific share for prospect of the prospect's mind and get them to act on that. Let's look at it a little differently. I know we talked in the past podcast that my weekend job as tailgating dad for my son's lacrosse team. Well, it's very similar to planning a successful tailgate. I take it back to that. You have a plan, or you spend a lot of money, no one shows up, and you have 25 bags of chips and more dessert than anybody can handle. Our unique position, I would say, as a leader in the tailgate dad section, but it's because we are always there 2 hours early, ready to go, and we always provide a main course. But you have to do your research. Where can we tailgate? What are the rules? You don't want people showing up with things they're not supposed to have. What are we going to cook? And that matters a lot too. This weekend we did brats. I simmered them in amber beer, garlic, and onions. But I had two batches. I had one that was a habanero and one without. But similar to developing a media strategy, I couldn't just go all in on the habanero. Our web team, they have these hot sauces, and I'm always down there, and they're always trying to trip me up, and they can't because I think my tongue is completely numb. I had to curb my heat sensors back a little bit to cater to my audience. It was one of the best tailgates we had. We're going to keep it very simple tomorrow with the burgers and our pregame in Holland, Michigan for the second round of the playoffs. But it's a lot of fun, but it takes a lot of planning.
Okay. So let's go to this idea of the strategy side. So in developing a go-to-market strategy, what's the most important thing in developing the strategy to ensure that it is effective?
Okay. Well, I think it's no surprise to you or our listeners to hear me say that it starts with positioning. But seriously, if you look behind you, if you don't have a solid bridge between your product and what's already in the prospect's mind, you're adding to the noise that's already in the market. You also have to assign a purpose to every dollar. Instead of just trying to be everywhere, you need to define specific roles for each one of the channels, whether that's building awareness, nurturing consideration, or closing the sale at the point of conversion.
Yeah, and you mentioned building awareness, and people want immediate results. Like you said, they're focusing on the go part of go to market. and they don't realize that it takes time. We had a client recently that we did. We just said, you're doing all transactional media. Nobody knows your brand yet because they were a small outfit. And we said, just run a small CTV campaign. They dropped $1,500 a month. And we said, now you have to understand, it's going to be about 2 months before it really kicks in. And they said, okay, we'll trust you. Well, about 3 weeks in, it was, what's going on? And we're not seeing anything. I said, give it time. Let's tell you what, I won't even make you wait 2 months. Let's wait 6 weeks. Okay. So you have 3 more weeks, put it on your calendar, give me a call and we'll chat about it. Well, 6 weeks in, they were having their best month of the year and they had 3 subsequent best months ever. And so the idea that brand building takes a while is one of those things that work into a go-to-market strategy. So having said that, we talk about on this podcast all the time about dramatizing a position, but how do you do that without looking like you're trying too hard?
Well, you have to earn attention because you can't buy it anymore. Consumers have become immune to all that noise, as I talked about earlier. I always point to brands like Nike or Aflac. They don't just explain their product, they move people. They get people to move. Nike leads with belief. And we've talked about Aflac a number of times. Aflac used a duck to give their brand personality before they ever put it on a billboard, so people wouldn't understand it if they didn't. Dramatizing is simply about taking that core position and making it human. Sometimes with a bit more humor or swagger, like Old Spice, no pun intended. Well, actually, I did intend that. They reinvented its declining brand by breaking the category norm with humor and somewhat absurdity. If you've seen some of the commercials, they turned a forgettable product that your dad used. I have to be careful now because I'm a dad, so it's different, into something that was more memorable and something you would want to use as a younger person. I do use it. So even though I am a dad, I do use it.
Well, you're a hip dad, so that makes it easier. Well, yeah, we throw a lot of brands out there and our clients don't tend to have the budgets of an Old Spice or, Nike, definitely not Nike. That would be a wonderful client to have, to be able to spend billions every year for them. But a lot of times we're talking about budgets that are 50 to 100,000 in media in a given year. And I think the patience of building that brand over time is so critical because they want those immediate results that transactional media can provide. And I think that speaks to what people are obsessed with today, and that's data and algorithms. And they look at it as, well, isn't the creative just like pretty packaging? How does what we're doing and understanding marketing and the strategy behind it, how does it actually save money?
Yeah, this is a trap I see marketers fall into all the time. It's paralysis by analysis. They think that if I have enough data, the creative doesn't matter, right? I know who I'm targeting and what's happening. Well, it does. The creative significantly increases the effectiveness of the campaign. The buzzword for that is it's the force multiplier. If we're talking about buzzwords. You can use data to find the exact right person. But if your creative is generic or boring, you've just spent a bunch of money to be ignored. They're not going to pay attention. Creative strategy saves money because it makes your media dollars work 10 times harder than they would if you didn't have that message. When you dramatize a position, as I mentioned earlier, Aflac, I know we talked about smaller clients and we do with our clients as well. But Aflac used that duck to give its insurance a personality. You earn attention instead of trying to buy it, as I said. High impact creative is rooted in a solid position. It's the difference between a million expensive clicks and a brand that people actually remember when it's time to buy.
Yeah. Lorraine and I talk on the podcast all the time about the both and, right? So the strategy, the position isn't always sexy. What's sexy about overnight delivery, or what's sexy about a safe car? So to your point, the creative side of this is what really is getting into the mind and grabbing hold of the emotion so that you can file that position in the mind that sits in the logical side, but is accessed by the emotional side. So going to the dollars that you mentioned about dollars being wasted or spent effectively, you hear, the famous statement that half of every advertising dollar is wasted. We just don't know which half, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can a solid go-to-market strategy help with that?
I can't tell you how many times I've worked with clients like John Deere or Riemann Rood dealers. You hear that quote all the time. We called it shotgun approach or spray and pray. And a lot of times when they worked with other agencies, they would say, oh, they have me on everything, and I don't know where I'm going or where I'm spending. A real go-to-market strategy fixes this by assigning a specific role to every dollar. Instead of you buying reach or frequency, you're buying a specific outcome. When your message is tight and on strategy, you aren't wasting money talking to people who will never buy, or worse, talking to the right people with a message that they'll never remember.
Yeah. That's always a challenge, I think, when we work with clients, because for us, even getting through the process of developing creative after we have the strategy, or buying the right media, we divide everything up into kind of the discipline of position, right? So get that right. And then what does the creative strategy look like? But then we have the distribution of the message. And all those things have to work together, or if any one of those falls down, then you can have a problem on your hands, which is ineffective marketing.
Right.
So I think sometimes that's part of the problem, is that with go-to-market strategy, people get lost in the process, but we do it all the time, to the extent that now, even as we're choosing media, we're able to think about the metric, the KPI, and the ultimate goal, and connect that back to the media so that we can say, okay, here's this that's going on, and this is what it resulted in. Talking about a different client now than what I did before with the programmatic, they were seeing a bunch of stuff work, but the director of marketing was a little frustrated because he goes, I'm not sure what works and what doesn't work in that. And we said, no, we can actually show you, you did this and it resulted in this. You did this and it resulted in this. You did this and it resulted in this. And he goes, well, I'm not sure you can show me that. So one of our account people here, Carson, really good with data, pulled all this stuff in, showed him for about a couple months exactly how the data was tying back to the marketing that we have been doing, and how that marketing connected back to the creative, which connected back to the position. So he was going in reverse order. And after about 6 weeks, the director of marketing was like, well, I don't want to go over this stuff anymore. And of course, it was like, well, that's what you've been asking for. What do you mean I want to go over it anymore? He goes, well, I know you guys know how it's working, and I trust that you know how it's working, and it is working. So we don't need to review it anymore. As long as whenever I need a report, you can get me one. So in other words, he had wanted this for so long. We give it to him, and then he goes, oh, okay, well, you know what you're doing. You know how to use it. So I feel confident in it. So that was kind of a key moment, I think, especially for Carson, who was like, oh, okay.
Tell me when it's not working. No.
Yeah. So when it comes to the execution of a campaign, basically the media, how do you actually make a plan come to life without destroying your budget?
Yeah. And I think that's, I might sound a little bit like a broken record, but it's really that purposeful allocation. You don't destroy your budget when you stop buying general awareness and start assigning a specific measurable measurable, there it is,
Hmm.
role to every media dollar. Most people waste money because they buy media like a blanket,
Hmm.
trying to cover everything at once, not even that one leg out of the covers, right? Um, but a smart media strategy targets specific stages of the journey. So if you look at the customer decision journey, by giving every channel a distinct job to do, you're not just spending, you're investing in a coordinated strategy overall.
Yeah, and that's another angle to that too, is if you're just testing into the market something,
Yeah.
then use test markets. So
Mhm.
let's say your region is the entire United States. Well, if you want to see what's working, then go to 2, 3 markets, and you always have to have a tight control. But it might be that you're testing, if you want to test message, then you have to have all your media the same. If
Mhm.
you are confident in your message, then you can alter the media slightly to see which media is working better. But why go to the entire country with the go to market strategy when you could test it out to start, assuming that time isn't completely of the essence, right? It gives that you have time to test and see what the optimal deployment is. So I think that's, some insight that a lot of people don't think about. They're like, "Oh, well, I can test something in brand building?" Yes. You're not going to one radio station or one TV station or one media outlet and buying their entire region anymore. We can literally buy things at the zip code level. We can buy things on drive time level. So always keep that in mind before you commit to something. There is that opportunity to test. So going back to, you made a comment about the budgeting again,
Mhm.
and this idea of doing a blanket coverage. And
Yeah.
we sometimes say you're taking too little resources and trying to do too many things.
Right.
And I think that's called spreading ourselves too thinly, right?
Yes.
So aren't we all doing that, or what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, the biggest mistake is the FOMO approach,
Okay.
fear of missing out. The idea that you have to be everywhere, that's a one-way ticket to failure or a huge ineffective budget. If that's something that's concerning you, that's not the way to go. There is pressure to be on every platform sometimes.
Mhm.
You have TikTok, LinkedIn, TV, search. There's so many things out there. But a go to market strategy isn't about, like you said, being everywhere. It's about being somewhere that matters. And like you talked about with those test markets, it's a
Mhm.
great example of just saying, hey, let's make sure this works here before we spread out. And that limits the risk that we would have. I'd rather a brand own one or two channels in a market or than have an extremely small and unforgettable presence across 10 different channels. Strategy is about just as much about what you don't do than what you do.
Mhm. Yeah, you wrote a blog recently on this, and in the blog, you were talking about bothism,
Mhm.
and I think that ties into this a little bit. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about that and why it's important for go-to-market planning?
Yeah, and I think you alluded to it a little bit earlier. We can thank Mark Ritson for that, and I thank Lorraine for introducing me to his work. If you can get past the language, he's a little on edge, but he's really smart and has a lot of great input. It's the idea that you shouldn't have to choose between brand building and performance marketing. We hear this all the time. When people say, "Oh, we can't do too much of this or too much of that." Well, brand investment actually makes your performance ads work better because it lowers customer resistance. If they already know that and trust you, um, they're way more likely to click buy now. I mean, they're more willing to go forward with the purchase. It's a strategic mix. The bothism approach means you're playing the long game and the short game at the same time. That makes for a much better game overall. At least in golf, it does. Something I can't seem to master, as you know, but it's one of those things that the long and short game make the difference. You need both brand building and performance media. a good go-to-market plan, marries the two to be more effective and efficient overall.
Yeah. We've had a lot of clients come to us and they're playing maybe just the short game, that performance marketing game. And I recall a client that came in and Cheryl, our executive creative director, said, I noticed you have 17,000 followers on Facebook, but you only get like 2 or 3 engagements on each post. Like, how did you get to that point? And he goes, oh, I don't know. We had an agency at one point and they did this whole thing and they got our followers way up and we were really impressed with that. And she go, well, if you have 17,000 followers, you should have much more than 2 or 3 likes on each post. And that really hit them. So, let me ask the question this way. If a client came to you like that, right, and was already self-aware of that and said, I have 1 million clicks or I have 1 million followers, but 0 sales or conversions, where did that go-to-market strategy or that go-to-market plan go wrong?
Yeah, I would say it's most likely means that the measurement is not aligned with the strategy. As you said, clicks are great, but they don't always pay the bills. You have to move beyond the data and look at the business outcomes. We work closely with our clients to get their feedback on leads, close rates, the ticket size, anything they're looking at there, to make sure that we're both seeing success. Because success on the data side doesn't always mean success on their end. If you have clicks but no sales, you likely have a positioning gap. You're getting people to the door, but once they peek inside and see what's in there, it's not giving them a compelling reason to stay. And they either run the other way or, worse yet, go to your competitor. You need to work with a team that can really help you monitor and optimize the entire funnel, not just the top of it. Our digital team is constantly, in our clients' campaigns, monitoring and optimizing, so that at the end of the month, when we sit down and talk to them to discuss performance, our clients know that we're doing our job. You get these retainers where they're supposed to be doing something for the whole month or doing stuff on your campaign, but they have nothing to tell you at the end of the month. They can't explain the optimizations they made. They have no recommendations for what you should do differently. But we also want our clients' feedback at that time as well. So, strategy remains an exercise until it shows up in real life and actually makes the market change. So you want to make sure that you're following through with it.
Yeah, and there's a good insight there too. And that is, if you are working with a marketer or an agency, whatever your relationship is, you have to give insight clear to how sales are going, because we can only peek so far into the organization. We can tee up the leads. We can see how the leads are moving through a funnel. If you have a CRM that we have insight into, we can see where the close rates are. We can see who's closing the best. We can see a lot of things. But if we don't get a peek into all of that, we can't necessarily help you with your entire spectrum of prospecting to converting the sale.
Yeah.
So I would say make sure, if you are one of those customers that likes to hold things close to the vest, that's not going to be a good relationship with your marketing team or an agency if you work with them. So we're up at time here. Why don't you give me a final thought? If you wanted listeners to take away one thing from this podcast or from your blog about go-to-market plans, strategy, etc., what would that be?
Always a great question. I would say change the market or stay home. Don't just try to be, 10% better than your competitor. Try to be unique or fundamentally different. If your go-to-market strategy doesn't shift how people think about the category itself, you're just competing on price. And that's never a game you want to be in. That always ends in a bad place. And so I would say just, make sure that you change the market. That's what you need to do.
Good advice. Thank you. Well, let's wrap up today's episode of the Brand Shorthand Podcast. Thanks, Tony, for joining us. And thank you to our loyal listeners for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with a friend, shout it from the mountaintops, subscribe. Did I say that one yet?
I think you
did. And until next time, have an amazing day.